So, Doug, I'm going to get straight into one of the most asked questions that I've been asked, and that is, does Hasson and Wong subscribe to the philosophy that, if you have a large amount of hair loss, like over 6, is it best to go strip FUT first and then go FUE? Or, and if you do actually end up going strip and then going FUE, how many more grafts, lifetime grafts, do you think you would have as opposed to if you just went strip or if you just went FUE?
Well, that's a good question, and I think there's a lot of factors involved. But if you just consider a patient that's maybe a stage 6 that needs quite a bit of coverage and is concerned about maybe crown coverage, when you're talking about that much real estate to cover, we have to explore the option of FUT potentially first. Now, the density has to be relatively good and the laxity has to be good. So if we're just going to make a decision based on what we would recommend, a stage 6 with good laxity, good donor hair would probably lean towards FUT. Now, some of these patients would say, I know your scars are great. I kind of like the option to shave my head. I really want to go FUE. So in that case, we just have to explain that you potentially might have a little less number of grafts available at the total, end of the donor reserves. And so you have to decide whether crown coverage or a thicker crown is important. So if those patients are willing to give up, and at the end of the day, maybe it's 2,000 grafts that you get less by doing all FUE, are you going to be happy if you can't use those in the crown? And some guys will say, yeah, I want to maybe shave my head and the crown doesn't bother me. And so some guys will say, hey, FUT is the way to go for me. And sometimes the cost becomes, a factor too. So if all things being equal, and they don't care about a small linear scar and they don't care about shaving their head, they may opt for FUT. So these factors come into play, and you can get more out of the total reserves if you do a large FUT first and then follow it up with FUE. And that's generally the way to go for the 6s and 7s.
Got you. And just one more question. If on the flip side, let's say, like for example me, right? I've had 3 FUEs. Let's say you have FUEs and then you decide, you know what? The strip scar doesn't bug me that much. I really just want to get that crown filled in. Is it possible to go FUT if you've already had a couple of FUEs?
It's possible, but you have to take into consideration some factors. Now, where did the patient go to get his FUE? Was it highly efficient? Were they using a small punch size? And does he still have a relatively good amount of density left? If he started with a really high amount of density and they haven't over-harvested or depleted, then you could consider another FUE, and then you got to weigh the the pros versus the cons. But if the FUE is such that maybe it wasn't that efficient, or maybe the density wasn't great to start with and the density's significantly lower or to some degree lower, then you got to ask yourself, even with a good scar, is there enough density to cover it? So you get to a certain density, you probably don't want to do a strip. So you got to have enough density left over. So it does depend on a few factors, but you can't rule it out, and it's certainly possible. But in some cases, probably not a good idea.
Okay, so that's one of the reasons why it's best to go strip first as opposed to going FUE first if you're going to go down that.
Well, if you are a stage 6 or 7 or extensive loss and your crown is really important to you and you don't care about a scar, I mean, it's not easy just to say cut and dry this or that. You got to look at the individual patient and consider all these factors. But in general, probably yes, but not always.